Have you ever taken a picture that looked just fine, but you were disappointed with it because it felt nothing like what you were hoping to capture when you took the picture? Well, this has nothing to do with talent, but I find that it's one of the most frustrating things about photography. Adding emotions to my photos is actually one of the most important things, I think, and something that I'm really trying to do with a lot of photos. And I think it's also one of the most difficult things to achieve. And I think this might be the secret sauce to our photographs that a lot of us are looking for, but that's also one of the hardest things to achieve. As you can see, I'm back in the botanical garden, taking pictures, filming during my lunch break, making the most of the beautiful grey winter weather. Today I'm well dressed up because the other day when I filmed, I got really cold when I'd forgotten my gloves. Yes, as I was saying, emotion is really important to capture that in your photos. And I think it has nothing to do with talent, but it has something to do with prioritization. So if you're trying to capture everything in your photos, that's when I think you're going to kind of ruin the emotions, the feelings in your photos. So having emotions in your photos, creating the secret sauce, I think, is about prioritizing, about what are you willing to exclude out of your frame and what will you include in your frame. Yeah, so I would say that for each photo you will have to choose one emotion. It's not such a good idea to try to make it too complex. So ask yourself first, what kind of emotion do you think you're feeling here the most? Is it more a calm scene? Is it quietness you would like to portray? Or is it something more dynamic you would like to include? Do you want to have some strong contrast, some strong lines? So I think here's a good example to show what I mean when I'm saying that you have to choose what kind of emotion you would like to portray, if you want something rather calm or something more exciting. So in this scene we've got several elements going on. We've got the lake, obviously, the water here, some reflection down there in the back, those grasses, what do you call that in English? In German we say Schilf. About this, we've got some trees at the top. So what I'm doing first now is that I'm looking at the different elements in the scene, and I'm going to decide if it's more a dynamic, more photo with a lot of excitement I want to show, or if it's more of a quiet photo I want to show. And sometimes you can even take both in the same day. It depends a little bit if that's what you want to do, if you see both in the same photo. The only thing that I think does not work so much is if you have dramatic and quiet in the photo, because the strong contrast, the dynamic parts will quickly take over. But first, I have a look at the trees up there. If I isolate them and I take a picture of that now, then I'll have quite a strong contrast. I'll have all those lines of the trees against the sky. And I think the emotion in here will be pretty loud, pretty excitable. This is not a quiet photo, I would say. I have to admit that I'm most comfortable with finding these kind of compositions where you have strong contrast and quite a lot of excitement in your photos. That's something that works quite well in black and white, I find, as well, because you can go quite far enhancing it later in Lightroom or in Photoshop. So that's quite individual as well, and I think that we all have different emotions that we like to capture in our photos. And I think this kind of preference for each of us to prefer calm photos or more excitable photos, I think that can change quite a lot as well during our life and from season to season. So now, after I noticed the trees up there and the more dynamic kind of composition, I'm going to challenge myself a little bit more, and I'm going to try to find something which is a little bit calmer, a bit more quiet. As I mentioned before, this is not something that I'm personally too comfortable with, but I think it's a good idea to do that as an exercise, to look for ways to challenge ourselves a little bit in our photography. What I'm doing now is that I'm looking at the grasses over there that were just lit by the light and I'm going to try to catch the interplay between the grass, the reflections, and the different parts of the grass. I'm going to go for a picture which has mainly grass and water in it, so that the overall mood is probably going to be relatively calm, relatively subdued, and these kind of photos are a little bit harder, I find, because it's not so easy to say to your audience, here's all this wild, exciting stuff going on. Maybe it's a little bit still because I used to post quite a lot on Instagram, and I find that it was easier to have these epic photographs there that were catching people's attention. And now I'm desperately trying to go back to a place where I allow myself to take pictures of quieter images, which have these calmer feelings in them, where I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone. But yeah, as you can see, this is like a monologue that's going on in our heads while we're taking the photos. And it's important to be clear what kind of emotion I'm going for. So I have quite a lot of contrast between the foreground and the background. So I'm going to I think there's a duck, which might be quite nice to include. Um, yeah, there's a duck. It's really little in the frame. Yeah, I think this might work quite well. You've got this quiet photo with a little detail of the duck that people can look for if they find it. So now let's talk a little bit about cropping and why I think this is helpful, to kind of choose the emotion you're trying to portray in your images. I think it's best to choose your composition while you're in the field. Of course, you could crop out some things later in Lightroom, but it's going to be much harder compared to taking your time, choosing the elements, and focusing really on that one thing. So yeah, basically, I think it's important to be clear on what you want to include and exclude in your composition while you're taking the photo, and not rely on cropping later on. So here, while I was taking this picture, for example, I noticed this here in the foreground, and I thought that looks nice. That's quite interesting. It's a bit dark in the video, but there's some nice grass blades and things. But when I take this in the background and this here, it just doesn't belong together. It's not the same emotion. We're going for something quiet, and if I put the two together, we're going to have quite strong contrast here. So I chose to crop this out visually and include only the. So now the question is, how much clarity is enough clarity or too much clarity? I think it's really quite individual, and it depends on what we're trying to express. Uh, it's good to have clarity, but too much clarity can kill clarity. Like if you go too close on a certain subject, on a certain emotion you're trying to portray, well, that's maybe not necessarily what you want to achieve. Sometimes it's good to leave a little bit of ambiguity, to leave some question marks. I think photography is not like a book, where you have a beginning, an end, and something in between. I think it's more like a suggestion. It's more like a snapshot, quite literally, and no pun intended, of a moment in time. And what makes a lot of difference in photography compared to other mediums, I think, is that you have this interplay, this kind of silent conversation between the photographer and the viewer later. And the viewer is taking with them all their baggages, all their history that they have. So it's quite good sometimes to leave a little bit of room, a little bit of leeway for the viewer to make their own interpretation, so that they look at an image, for example, and think, oh yeah, I can feel a certain emotion, which might be or might not be what we were trying to express, but at least it gives them a starting point to then see some kind of connection with their own lives. So here are the three things that we discussed today. The first one was, what kind of emotion do you want to include in this particular photo? The second thing was, what are you willing to exclude in order to protect that particular emotion that you want to concentrate on? And the third thing we discussed just before was, how much clarity do you really need? how much clarity is enough and how much is too much overkill. So it's great if we can start to include some emotions in our photos. But I find that some photos still feel like they're falling kind of flat because, yes, they include an emotion, but it's not clear what they're all about or what they are trying to say. And that's exactly what I'm going to discuss in the next video. So thank you for watching and have a beautiful day. And I'm hoping to see you in the next one.